For this synthesis project, I will be going over what I learned from modules 4, 5, and 6. So starting off with module 4, I learned about the stop process, which is searching out the facts, thinking about the alternatives and consequences, thinking about others, and praying to God and talking to other spiritual figures. I mainly learned about the stop process through the moral decision making assessment, where we had to look at someone's deeds and we had to use the stop process to actually analyze those events. And I believe the stop process will greatly help me in the future by reminding me to really think before I act, especially in life making decisions, because just like that, like a small choice can really determine your future. And to make sure I make the correct choice or the moral choice, I'm going to use the stop process to not only view how this will affect myself, but also how it will affect others and God's creation. In addition to the stop process, I actually learned that you can never judge a true person's character, because the only being that will only know their intentions is God Himself. Because as human beings, we can't read minds, so we will never know both sides of the story. For example, say if we see someone stealing from a store, someone stealing food from a store, and that's the only action we see. Right off the bat, we're going to say, oh, that person's bad. But we're only saying that because we do not know both sides of the story. For example, although we only see people stealing, or that person stealing from a store, their true intentions might be to steal goods to provide for their family. And in the future, I will use this to my advantage by never judging a book by its cover and never judging a person by one action they may have committed. And I mainly learned this material through reading over the text and just reviewing it. In addition to not being able to judge a true person's character, I also learned that prayer is a big part of the whole decision-making process too. And I learned that not only consulting God for information and guidance is a big part in making moral decisions, but you can also reach out to your priest. You can also reach out to religious figures. You can reach out to deacons. You can reach out to religion teachers as well. And I mainly learned this through the text, and I also reached out to Deacon Joe about this as well. And I also learned this from the moral decision making presentation, and I can use this in the future by consulting religious figures in my life, such as various priests and religion teachers, about tough choices that I may run into in the future. And I can also use this in the future by praying to God and referencing the Bible as well. Moving on to Module 5, I actually learned about the 7 capital sins: gluttony, lust, anger, envy, greed, pride, and sloth. On top of the 7 capital sins, I also learned about how common they are in everyday life and how tempting they are to commit. And I mainly learned about the 7 capital sins through the sin forgiveness presentation. And moving forward, I would have to say that I would definitely keep all these 7 things in mind, and just remind myself to not commit them. Because, for example, I remember I commit sloth sometimes. I'm very lazy. Sometimes I procrastinate with homework and chores. And I would say sometimes I envy others and their material goods. And just keeping in mind all these 7 capital sins, I would have to say that I just have to be more mindful of them and just make sure I don't commit them. In addition to the 7 capital sins, I also learned about reconciliation, which is the sacrament of healing, also known as penance or confession. And although I knew about the sacrament before, I was reminded of how powerful it can be. I mainly learned about reconciliation through the sin and forgiveness presentation. And moving forward, I would definitely keep in mind that reconciliation is a great privilege that I should always keep in mind of. Because I remember in the past where at Reardon they would hold confession, but I wouldn't go. But moving into the future, I will definitely remember that confession is a gift to really cleanse yourself. And even though I may not remember all of the things at the top of my head, I will always make a conscious effort to go and sit down with and talk with whoever's holding confession, because at the end of the day, we are all sinners and we can all improve ourselves in one way or another. And lastly, from Module 5, I learned about the idea of concupiscence, which is actually the inclination toward evil caused by original sin. And before this, I had no idea what concupiscence was. But after learning it, I learned that everyone actually has an inclination towards evil because of Adam and Eve's wrongdoings in the Garden of Eden. And I mainly learned this through the sin and forgiveness presentation. And moving forward, I will also keep in mind that all humans have concupiscence, or the inclination towards evil, because of original sin. And to kind of cope with this, I'll definitely keep in mind that I have a natural inclination towards evil. So before I make any decisions, I'll refer to the thought process, and I'll actually reach out to others and see how it affects them, and also pray to God. And for others, I can help others by reminding them that they have an inclination towards evil as well, and therefore, just kind of try and I'll try and remind other people and my family and friends that just to keep in mind that we're all naturally evil, and if we want to make more choices, we must pray and refer to God. In Module 6, I may learn more about sexual ethics, specifically the scientific and religious standpoints of it. I personally learned a lot about sexual ethics from our project. Me, Cole, and Ashin, we actually did our presentation on sexual ethics, and I learned about many different standpoints and a lot of scientific research from the whole thing. And moving forward, I'll use the knowledge I learned from my own research and presentation on sexual ethics. I will use that to make conscious choices moving forward, especially with sexual actions, and I will just make choices that not only respect everyone, respect those around me, but I will make choices that follow good Catholic sexual ethics. Another thing that I learned from Module 6, specifically from the morality project, was that communication is key. And although this isn't really part of the material, I do believe that communication is a big part of everyday life, and that's why I'm talking about it. And I mainly learned that communication is a big key especially when getting things done, is because without communication, you won't truly know who's doing what, how everyone's doing, and I just believe communication is a big part. And like I said before, I learned this from the morality project, and moving forward, I'll definitely take communication more into consideration when you're doing group projects instead of everyone doing their own thing. And just with overall everyday life, I believe it's very important to communicate with anyone, because communication is key. And lastly, for Module 6, aside from sexual ethics, I was definitely more educated on various points of view from different situations. One presentation that really stood out to me was I would have to say, the DUI presentation. And of course, I always knew that driving under the influence is really dangerous. But the thing that really stood out to me was the video they showed, and how fatal it can be. Obviously, like I said before, I knew that DUI was a big problem before, but they kind of dove into like the specifics of it, the statistics, how many people die a year, and it just really stood out to me. And using this for the future, especially for all the presentations, I'll definitely use all the information they provided me, and I'll just always keep it with me. And specifically, like the DUI one, it just proved to me that it's a really horrible thing, and it's something that nobody should ever take part of. But overall, that's what I learned from Module 6, and this is everything that I learned from the past 3 modules, Modules 4, 5, and 6.